Hi, I'm Andrew, a Krav Maga instructor based in southeast London. I was going to make a video about useful gifts you could give to someone for Christmas or Hanukkah, but I've managed to miss Hanukkah. So, you got a friend or a loved one who's taken up Krav Maga. He or she can't stop talking about it, and you're wondering what you could give them for Christmas, but you don't know anything about Krav Maga. Here are some ideas that might help. Okay, number one, no stink glove deodorizers. So pretty much every single Krav Maga student is going to use a pair of boxing gloves. These need to be dried between each use, and with the best will in the world, they're eventually going to start to smell though, because we sweat a lot through our hands, and whether you've got leather gloves or synthetic gloves, eventually you get a lot of build-up and the glove starts to stink. The answer is you need a pair of these things, and they are just sachets of activated charcoal. You take your dry glove, you take your sachet of charcoal, you put them in there, and they absorb the smell. Job done. They come sealed, so you can gift them and your recipient can use them whenever they need. Absolutely essential thing for a Kravist to have. Number two, Meditations on Violence, a comparison of martial arts training and real-world violence by Rory Miller. Okay, so this is an iconic book on violence. When I first met Rory, maybe 8 years ago now, I said to him that I thought he was probably the Musashi of our time. Rory snorted and replied that he thought that Musashi was a murdering bastard. Regardless, I think he understood the compliment. Rory's probably the most important writer on violence in our time, and this is probably his most important work. When I used to be a teacher in a school, I once covered a group of kids who are lower ability. And one boy proceeded to sit underneath the desk and literally paint the entire page of handout with highlighter. That's something I could actually do with this book. So many of what I thought have been original thoughts of mine have just turned out to have been things that I've read in meditations, but forgotten at the time. What Rory writes about the different categories of violence, social violence, predatory violence, what he writes about the freeze, permissions, initiative, awareness, the differences in violence for men and women, dealing with the aftermath of violence. Any of those things would be worth the price of this book alone. It's so important that I would say that if you're gifting it, you should buy like a separate copy for yourself and read it yourself, even if you're not a Kravist. Because literally the information in this book could save your life, even if you don't practice any physical or technical skills. It's that important. Give it as a hard copy so that your recipient can read it, and if they've already got it, or if they feel like they've fully digested it, although God knows when that will happen, they can give it on to someone else. It is that important a book. It is the first book you should read if you're studying self-defense and if you're trying to learn about this thing called violence. Buy it now. All right. Zebra F701 ballpoint pen, or the Zebra FXMD, which is what I've got here. So a lot of students ask me about magic wands, about talismans, about using keys for self-defense, about Coubertins, about weapon pens, about like sprays and all sorts of like tools that they can use that would work, right? I think a lot of the time that the issue is that they're kind of looking for substitutes. They're looking for substitutes to the very hard and sweaty and unending work of getting as strong as they can be and being ready to hit hard and defend themselves. And the problem is there isn't any such damn thing. You have to be developing your open hand skills to the max and making sure that those things stay sharp, right? And then keeping them at a good, maintained level by constantly hitting things and staying really, really fit. There isn't any substitute for that. Having said that, if you are doing that work, then it can be useful to sort of think about using force multipliers, especially if you're like a smaller person. And this is something I bring up with a lot of my female clients, right? Because if you are dealing with someone who is like, on average, 7 inches taller, 11, 15 kilos heavier than you, but has 40% more upper body mass, using some kind of force multiplier is going to really help. Now, In the UK, it's illegal to carry anything that has been designed as a weapon, or anything which you're carrying in contemplation of possibly using it as a weapon. So that makes it really, really difficult to carry anything that's potentially effective. Now, I've got a Smith & Wesson ballpoint pen, which is made out of like aircraft grade aluminium, has an amazing point on the end, and will merrily punch a hole through someone's skull. The problem is, it's got a really nicely made point on the end, and it's got the name of a really famous gun manufacturer written on it, which isn't going to really go down very well in a court of law if I use it successfully to defend myself. And the same goes for my Cold Steel Pocket Shark, and that's like a weaponized Sharpie made out of like some sort of indestructible plastic. Could easily beat someone to death with that. But the problem is, it's got the name of a famous knife maker written on it. That's where the zebras come in. These are just steel pens. They're available on Amazon. There's no mention of the word tactical in their description on any shopping website. And you're allowed to carry these with you. They're just pens. You're allowed to have these on an aeroplane. They're not going to be as rigid as a tactical pen, but they're plenty rigid enough. And they're a hell of a lot better than the plastic pen that Jason Bourne found himself using in a Paris hotel. I think the best thing of all is that they're only like £7.50. So like where the Smith & Wesson pen costs like $48 and you're afraid of losing it and you're carrying it thinking, oh my God, it's a weapon and I need to use it on some bad guy. This is just a pen, and it does pen detail first and foremost, but it's ready and quite capable of doubling as a really good improvised pointy object. And that's something, if you're a KMG student, you're going to encounter around P5, so about 2.5 years into your training, which is just perfect. Yeah, regardless of how far the person is into their training, they're going to appreciate a nice useful pen which will eventually double as a potential self-defense improvisable weapon. Krav Maga, Combat Mindset and Fighting Stress, How to Perform Under Alarming and Stressful Conditions by Eyal Yanilov and Ole Boer. Eyal Yanilov is the chief instructor of Krav Maga Global, and Dr. Ole Boer is a high-ranking expert in Krav. He's also an expert in psychology and combat stress with masses of experience in the Norwegian military. He gave a really informative talk to us instructors in the UK during the pandemic and really, really knows his stuff. The mental side tends to get less airtime in Krav Maga classes, I think, because, time's tight, and I just have this kind of sneaking suspicion that students ultimately are paying us instructors for the hard skills. They want to come along and they want to be training on how to put a guy down hard. And I think there's also a kickboxing contingent, people who want to come along to a class and they don't really feel like they've had a good class unless they've hit some stuff and had a good sweat. So like, this is like almost the kickboxing market. I think on top of that, once we get you moving and sweaty, we don't really want to lose that tempo with a whole load of talk. We want people to get their heart rates up and to stay up at a sustainable rate and then to peak at the end. And I think stopping people to have a long tactical or mental talk can be really difficult. On top of that, there's a question of whether you can even take in anything that we say anyway, because once your heart rate's up, your ability to take in new information diminishes. So I think, one, that there's room for kind of saying all the mental and tactical stuff early on in lessons. That's when students tend to be able to take it in. But I think there's also room for books and courses and lectures. And I think that's where this book comes in. It's got 3 main parts. They're focused on how to overcome stress, how to develop a combat mindset, and how to develop mental strength. And I think the book really deals with the most important ways that Krav actually interacts with most civilians in their everyday lives. I mean, most of us are not actually going to get into violent self-defense encounters with any kind of regularity. So this is particularly important. Krav affects the way we handle stress, how our characters develop, how we develop mental toughness, how we maintain focus, lead other people, manage our own body language and posture. And this book goes into all of those different things. I think if you're like a younger person who hasn't done a lot of reading in this area, then there's going to be heaps and heaps of stuff here that is going to be incredibly useful to you. But even if you're a bit older and you've read quite a bit on like stress and psychology like me, there could still be a few nuggets in here that can open your eyes. What Eyal and Ole wrote about heart rates and that ability to think massively influenced what I say to my students and when I say it, for instance. What they say about inactive mastery experiences is incredibly important and eye-opening as well. There's so much in here, and I think if you're a KMG student, it's essential reading. You need to know the mental and the tactical adjunct to what we teach you in class. But even if you're not a KMG student, there's going to be something in here which is useful for you in terms of your Krav Maga development. If you're an instructor, then I would say, like an instructor for any system, KMG or not, then this is essential reading because the book is just packed with like really useful drills and actually really good detailed explanations and photos of how those drills are actually carried out. So they give you an idea of what we do in KMG and quite frankly, a load of really, really useful things that you could actually do in class. So for like 19 quid, absolutely essential read. Foam training stick. So there's a 1 in 5 chance in the UK, specifically in England and Wales, that you're going to be dealing with a weapon. And there's a 1 in 20 chance that that weapon is going to be a stick or hitting implement of some sort. Now, our responses to sticks in Krav Maga Global, like hyper-aggressive, explosive, and they rely on a bursting forward motion, a stabbing defense, and sometimes like a simultaneous hitting so that we create like a massive collision effect as we make contact with the attacker. And that is a really demanding technique to learn. Both in terms of the instinct to move forward into danger, and also just making all the right shapes that you need in order to maximize the damage to them whilst defending yourself when you make that contact. So, for that reason, I've long thought that stick defenses have been the most complex part of the practitioner curriculum, and that tends to be what I see in gradings. So this was the topic that actually made me start training with a friend outside of classes, and it was a transformative experience for me actually, because it made me realize how important that partner training can be, as well as just going to regular classes. I bonded with my training partner and he became an incredibly important friend, and I want to talk about him more in another video. But that bonding and that experience of training outside of class is just incredible. And I just hope that every intermediate Kravist gets to have the same experience at some point. There's just nothing better than being out in the sun somewhere and just working on a technique with someone who's just really obsessed with getting it right, just like you. If you're going to be doing that, you're going to need a stick of your own. So hopefully someone is going to give you one. And at like £11, including postage, it's a small thing to be able to add to your arsenal of training gear. So well worth having your own stick. Pro tip, by the way, on these is if you receive one of these sticks, cover the end with a bit of gaffer tape. That stops them from crumbling and fraying when they're kind of rammed into things, which can make the kind of plastic end exposed, and then you get like poked in the eye, which is no good. So, club t-shirt. Now, it's always been kind of strange and unrealistic in a way that we get into a specific uniform every time we train to do this thing, which almost certainly won't involve us being in a uniform when we're doing it in reality, right? So real self-defense situations tend to happen in whatever clothes that we tend to be wearing. On the other hand, I think it's one of the paradoxes of Krav Maga and self-defense that we keep doing things as people where those things are done by people and groups that we like and we want to be connected to. And one of the ways that we evidence that liking and connection as people is to wear clothes, the same clothes. I think it definitely looks smarter, and I think it looks more professional at gradings and events if everyone's in a uniform. And I remember that like one of my teenage students once remarked that I looked on job when I turned up in mine. Clean, fresh, well-maintained uniforms and equipment are one of the ways that we evidence our commitment to the standards of the organization and the activity that we're doing. And I know for sure when I'm teaching a group of people, and You can flame me in the comments below for saying this, but when I'm teaching a group of people and some people are wearing the uniform and some people are not, that I am slightly biased towards the ones who are wearing the uniform. I mean, I try and get round to everyone and I make sure that I do in a class, but when I see people who have bought the uniform, I'm going, those people are putting money behind their commitment. And it's rare that people who don't buy the uniform persist longer than the people who do. And persistence is important because if I'm giving advice, if I'm helping a student with something, I want to know that they're going to be around to build on that advice. So uniforms may bias me as an instructor towards going, that person is serious about what we're actually doing, or at least a bit more serious about what we're doing. And I've never spoken to any other instructors about this, and I know it's superficial, but it's true. So if I feel it, then I'm sure other instructors feel it too. We can't have too many of these things as Krav students. Like the most important and demanding skill that you can have as a Krav Maga practitioner is doing laundry. So you need loads of club t-shirts. KravMaga.co.uk sell KMG's training t-shirts for like 20 or 25 pounds, and I'm sure other Krav organizations and clubs have their own equivalent. So if you're not sure what to get for your guy or girl, just ask them like where they train, find the club's website, and then send them an inquiry, and I'm sure they'll help you out. So either they'll sell their own t-shirts, or they'll direct you to where you can get something that's suitable. Yeah, you can never have too many of these things. Okay, landmine barbell attachment. This is a metal ball attached to like a tube with a screw on it. It goes on the end of a barbell, basically. And what it does is it, along with a towel, allows you to jam that barbell into the corner of a room and then use the barbell in what we call a landmine configuration. Now, strength and conditioning is super important in Krav Maga. And a barbell is an extremely useful tool in strength and conditioning because it's commonly available, and it can be loaded very, very incrementally and trackably. So you can get incredibly strong using a barbell. The basic barbell movements of the press, the row, the squat, the deadlift are really, really useful and transferable to all sorts of sports. But the issue is they tend to be bilateral, so they're like both sides, and they tend to be up and down movements. So the resistance is coming from straight up. Whereas in Krav and in life, resistance tends to be coming from like in front of us as well, and we tend to be having to push both forwards and kind of upwards at the same time. That, and we're standing in like staggered stances, so one foot is forward of the other, and we tend to be doing lots of rotational movements as we strike and grapple as well. What that means is that if you just have this humble little bit of metal, and I picked this one up on AliExpress for £20, I think, maybe even including delivery. I'll put a link below. This and a little towel, you can turn the humble barbell, which you'll often find in a lot of basic kind of building apartment gyms, which are kind of places I PT in. You can take that barbell and turn it into a landmine, which opens up a complete universe of really, really useful and combat applicable rotation focused exercises. What I'll do is I'm going to put over, as I'm speaking right now, some footage of David Weck of Weck Method, who's an incredible inventor, doing an exercise which is like, it shows his coiling core method, he calls it, of using a barbell in a landmine configuration with a band for additional resistance. And I'll also put over some video footage of Ilya Dunsky, who's one of the top instructors at Krav Maga Global, doing a stick defense, which demonstrates the kind of movement that David Weck is doing with a landmine, but in an applicable form. So you can really see how these kind of movements are helpful, combatively speaking. It's small, it's cheap, pretty much everyone could make use of something like this if they've got access to a barbell, and all you need is a towel and a corner of a room as well. It's just such a useful bit of kit to have, and as a PT I love it because I can just carry it to my clients, and it opens up a whole like universe of exercises, some of which I'll try and cover on this channel in the future. So yeah, awesome gift. All right, PT session. A typical craft class is going to last about an hour, maybe up to an hour and 30 minutes, but they're kind of getting shorter nowadays. And they'll have between like 6 and maybe 26 students. I, as an instructor, make it a point to try and touch base with every single student as an individual during that time. But inevitably, that isn't going to be for very long. There are ways to mitigate those constraints. So there are tricks that we use as instructors to try and make sure that we get to more people and that our advice reaches more than one person and we're as efficient with our time as possible. But there's just going to be nothing like making accelerated progress than working one-to-one with an instructor. I mean, you're literally going to be getting something like 20 times as much attention in the same span of time. And I think this is really, really important when you're an advanced student, but I don't think you have to be an advanced student to benefit from personal training. If you're older, if you're dyspraxic, if you're just really, really focused on learning as quickly as possible, if you're smaller as well, so you just need some adaptation to your technique, and you need an instructor who can deal with how you would adjust your technique for being smaller, or in any way just physically different, right? If you've got an injury where you need someone to work around your injury with skill, maybe, all of these things can mean that you're suitable and would benefit from a personal training session. What I would say is that you should have a chat with your friend or loved one, kind of find out how they're doing with their Krav Maga, and find out about their instructor, and see what he or she says about their instructor. Like, if they're highly positive and they go, oh, this person's just revelatory and just incredible and progressive and just brilliant, and I'm learning all sorts of amazing things, then consider getting in touch with him or her and maybe paying for a PT session, maybe for your friend and loved one recipient, and possibly for them to bring another friend as well, because sometimes people can be intimidated about training with instructors when they are beginners, and they benefit from having like that special friend that they always like to train with in class when they're beginners. I think that's, by the way, that also makes it easier for us as instructors, because we can take like what's called a referee's position. So we'll stand there and like have people on either side, and we can actually see what they're doing clearer as well. I know it's much easier for me to actually coach when I'm actually watching them, as opposed to having to hold pads for them. So possibly get them a PT session if you think they would actually benefit from that. All right, last but not least, TRX force, right? So for a lot of Kravists, like, Krav Maga represents the first physical activity that they get into, and especially for a lot of men, I've found that they tend to go through a kind of military or Spartan phase when they get involved with Krav. They love the fact that it comes from an army. They love army things. They want to be tough and making their own beds. You know, they want to get that whole discipline equals freedom thing from Jocko Willink. And they want to do like 100 pull-ups and like 200 push-ups and just go completely military as part of getting their life together, basically. They tend to grow out of that, and they tend to become fantastic Kravists if they do. Either that, or they can kind of disappear. But whether your friend or loved one is going through a phase like that or not, and I'll talk about that more on this channel in the future, having a bit of equipment that allows us to work out at home or when we're traveling can really make a difference to whether we stay in fighting shape or not. And conditioning is probably like 50% of fighting. I think that like a TRX is the single best tool for someone who's training from home or in a hotel room. It's light, it's portable, it can be set up in any reasonably solid doorway. And I think it's a gateway to like a whole load of workout options. There's a gazillion workouts on YouTube that a busy person can just follow along at the end of like a long day of meetings, you know. It effectively allows them to switch off and just get a workout done by following something with some earbuds and an iPhone and a YouTube connection, basically. Yeah, there are cheaper options for suspension trainers out there. I mean, it's a bunch of nylon straps and you know, rubber buckles and whatever. But TRXs, I think, tend to be slightly better made. And the thing is, all the online workouts are specifically designed for it. If we look at any kind of busy commercial gym, it's called a TRX class. They never call it a suspension trainer class. And these things are such incredible workout tools. They're so versatile. And like mine, I've had now for 9 years. They're tough and they're fantastic value for money. And if you're someone who's if you're buying for someone who's considering becoming an instructor and a personal trainer, they're an incredibly useful tool from that perspective as well. The TRX Force variant, which is the one I'm wearing on my shoulders right now, comes in this cool sort of militaristic khaki, and I think that goes well for us as Kravists. And it's pricey, but there are like cheaper versions that come up on eBay in brand new and unopened conditions from time to time, and I think they make an awesome, slightly luxurious and spendy gift for any Kravist. Okay, so that's a bunch of ideas for gifts that you could give to someone over Christmas if they were a Krav Maga student. I hope that was useful to you. If you've had any other ideas, or if you've managed to think of anything or any particularly lovely gift, please put those in the comments below. I've thought of boxing gloves, and I thought of focus mitts and bits of protective equipment and sparring gear, but I think those are kind of quite particular things, and those are things that people should already have, and they tend to be a little bit more spendy as well. They should be part of standard kit, so I didn't want to include anything like that in here. But if you've got anything that you feel should be like a perfect Christmas gift or Hanukkah gift for a Kravist that you've managed to give before, mention that in the comments below. If the video has been useful to you, please like the video and consider subscribing, which will help the channel grow. Okay, until the next one, walk in peace.